Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I just watched the new episode of Star Trek Discovery called If Memory Serves, and I think this was relatively a good episode of Star Trek Discovery. It still had a whole bunch of stuff which annoyed me, and I'll elaborate in detail, but overall it wasn't that bad. It even had some good points in it, so I want to go over all of it in detail, and I'll tell you the good and the bad. All of it is my opinion, of course. And they start the episode showing a compilation from the original pilot of Star Trek, The Cage. And I guess they had to do that so that everybody watching will understand that this is a sequel to that episode, because some people online I saw they didn't get that this is taking place after that episode. They thought it's before, and so it's a good thing they kind of clarified that. And also anyone who didn't watch that original episode will kind of be able to understand some of it, even though I think that compilation should have been longer. They should have really explained more things, because I think anyone who didn't watch that original episode probably wouldn't understand a lot of things in this episode. But for all the Trekkies who are familiar with it, I think this episode, to me at least, was kind of okay. Like, it kind of fit. It kind of didn't piss me off, at least with the Talosian storyline. I'll get to some of the other stuff. Maybe my expectations were just so low, because I expected them to mess everything up completely, and so maybe because of that, because they didn't mess it up totally, so it's kind of a relief. I was relieved that they didn't totally destroy everything, and so that's why I consider it kind of okay. And even good in some places. I actually liked it. And in my previous review I was complaining about how the Talosians look like, and now after seeing the full episode, I don't think it's that bad. Like, I still think the originals looked more creepy, especially because they played around with the gender. They had the females playing them with a male voice, and so it kind of made them creepier. Also, the makeup itself, I think, was creepier because, you know, those veins were popping up and it was a practical special effects, and here it's CGI. So I don't think it looks as good, and I wish they would have done it closer, because for some reason they decided to do a little bit of a redesign. For example, they gave them that long nose ridge which goes into the forehead, so why was that necessary? Why not make it as similar as possible to the original? So that's my minor complaint about the Talosians. As for the story itself, it actually wasn't that bad. Like, it kind of fits the original. There were a few missed opportunities. For example, no one ever mentioned the death penalty that Starfleet's supposed to have to prevent anyone from going to that planet. Totally missing from this whole episode. I was hoping that maybe they will directly explain that by saying that maybe it gets imposed after this event, and yet it was never mentioned by anyone. It was mentioned that it's not allowed to go there, but no one talked about any kind of punishment for that. So that pissed me off a little bit. On the other hand, saying that the Federation has a death penalty doesn't really fit the spirit of that vision, and so maybe I'm kind of okay with them kind of not mentioning that directly. And also it would be a contradiction with what the Admiral said in season 1 when she was talking to L'Oreal, the Klingon woman. She told her there is no death penalty in the Federation. So I was hoping they would explain it in this episode by saying that it got imposed after this episode, and yet no one ever mentioned that. So let me now review this whole episode by order. So they started with that compilation from The Cage, and then they cut to the spinning camera of Star Trek Discovery, and I was like, stop spinning the camera all around, it makes me motion sick. And then the camera stops, and then the door opens and a lens flare comes out at my face, and so this is one of the things I hate about the show. And the lens flares were once again all over the place in this episode. Don't you get that it makes people physically sick? I have motion sickness. I hate seeing spinning cameras and lens flares. Another thing that pissed me off in this episode is that they directly show us that Section 31 is working for a bunch of admirals. Not just one admiral, not just some admiral who's colluding with them, but actually they show us some kind of meeting. In the end of the episode, they show what's going to be in the next episode, and they show the headquarters of Section 31. So this feels like a slap in the face to all the fans of the old Star Trek shows. You know, in Deep Space Nine, they directly said that they have no headquarters. Why? Not because it got destroyed somehow, which I guess they will do in the next episode, because it doesn't make sense for them to have it. It makes no sense for them to keep all their information in some place where it can be stolen, and so on. They're far more clever than that in Deep Space Nine. They say the information doesn't all exist in one place or in the hands of one person, because they're operating more like a terrorist organization. They have different cells, they have a diversification of all this information, they don't keep it physically in any one place, they have no headquarters, because it wouldn't make sense. And yet they show us that in the next episode we will see a giant starbase which is the headquarters of Section 31. And I guess they will blow it up in the end, and that will explain why they didn't have it later. They didn't have it because it makes no sense for them to have it. because they are an illegal organization. They would get arrested and all their information will fall into the hands of the authorities and Starfleet, and so that's why they don't keep any information in any one place. So anyway, in this show, Section 31 is kind of like the CIA of Starfleet, so they're working for Starfleet directly. I guess they can somehow squeeze their way out of this continuity problem with all kinds of excuses. They can say maybe it was a secret organization in the past, like it was shown to us in Enterprise, that they were not working for Starfleet Command. Archer threw Reed into the brig for working for them and not for him, and he said he will be court-martialed, and so obviously Section 31 were not an official legal part of Starfleet. Otherwise, some admiral would have contacted Archer and told him to let Reed go. Now, I could say that maybe because of the Klingon War, maybe that's when Starfleet decided to make Section 31 official again, and so maybe that could explain it, and then later they could become a separate organization once again. And even the Romulans had no idea what Section 31 is, which makes no sense if they were such an official part of Starfleet that everybody talks about them in the corridors of the ship, everybody can hear about them. It doesn't make sense. Also, I found it silly how Ash Tyler is talking with Pike about Section 31, and all this while he's wearing the comm badge of Section 31. So how do they know that that device doesn't record their entire conversation? Maybe it sends the conversation to the Section 31 ship. Maybe they know exactly what they're talking about. Like, how could they know it doesn't happen? How could they trust this comm badge? And also in that holographic meeting between the admirals and Section 31, they show a female Vulcan admiral who is giving them orders, and I'm like, she's a Vulcan and the Vulcans are supposed to be enlightened, and yet she's okay with Section 31. Also, I don't think there should even be Vulcan admirals in this time period, because I remember in the original series everybody acted as if Spock is kind of a one-of-a-kind, unique thing, that a Vulcan who is working for Starfleet, because the Vulcans, even though they were members of the Federation, but they seem to be kind of isolationists. Even Spock's father didn't want him to join Starfleet, and there was a line in one episode by Kirk in which he said that the events of Axanar is what made him and Spock brothers when he was a cadet. It all happened, so I kind of always imagined there were some tensions between the Vulcans and the rest of Starfleet and the Federation, so not a lot of Vulcans joined Starfleet, and Spock was kind of unique, and yet in this show we saw a whole bunch of Vulcan admirals in Starfleet, so that also seems like a bit of a continuity contradiction. I don't remember if it was ever directly mentioned that Spock is the only or the first Vulcan in Starfleet, but it was kind of implied in a lot of episodes. Also, that Vulcan Admiral woman had a really annoying voice, but not as annoying as Georgiou's bad accent. Now, I have a pretty bad accent myself, so I'm the last one to complain about that, but her dialogue is hard to understand sometimes. Like, I can barely understand what she's talking. Another thing that annoys me, whenever they show shuttles, all the shuttles in the show have warp engines. And that's also a contradiction, because even in TNG time, we often saw shuttles without any warp engines. A lot of times we saw Picard take a shuttle to go somewhere while the Enterprise goes somewhere else, and we see that he needs to travel by shuttle for hours and hours, and it seems to be moving at impulse speeds, and he said that it's like traveling in the 22nd century spaceships, which by itself is another contradiction, because it seemed to imply as if they didn't have warp travel in the 22nd century. So anyway, in this show, every single shuttle seems to have warp engines as fast as any starship. So it's not a direct contradiction. Maybe we can say it's simply a more expensive shuttle. And in TNG times, I guess they were preserving the resources, which is a topic I want to leave for another video. I wanted to talk about the economics of the Federation. And one of my ways to maybe explain away all these contradictions is saying that maybe because the Federation is a socialist and communist, maybe that actually negatively affected their economy. Maybe Starfleet actually becomes cheaper as it goes into the future, because the technology seems to be getting more primitive as they go into the future. So one way to explain it is by saying that the economy of the Federation is actually getting weaker in the future, so that's an excuse, I guess. And also this shuttle looks kind of like the paddle jumper in Atlantis. So anyway, Michael and Spock land on Talos 4, and first they have to go through an illusion which makes the planet look like a black hole, which I did kind of like because it explains how come no one stumbles on this planet by accident. So maybe everybody thinks it's a black hole and so they don't approach, and Spock forces her to go through this black hole, and then they appear next to the planet. And the whole subplot with the resurrected Doctor, I hated that plot at first, but in this episode it was actually a bit interesting. First of all, I find it hilarious that apparently that guy is no longer gay after coming back to life. That's something that people noticed from the very first time that he reappeared on the show, when he came back to life and the Stamens kind of touches him and so on, and he looks kind of uncomfortable as if he doesn't want to. And so people immediately kind of joke about maybe that he's not gay anymore. And in this episode, apparently he doesn't want Stamens anymore. So I just found that funny. And also the conflict between him and Ash Tyler. And then they fight in the mess hall. And Saru doesn't let anyone stop it. He says they need to do that. So Saru is all like, let them fight. So I kind of liked that whole scene. I never expected to like this storyline because I hated the way they brought him back and the fact they brought him back at all. But they actually did it pretty well in this episode. The fact that he's not really himself, that's something I said should be done if they bring someone back from the dead. It shouldn't just be back to normal. They should explore this idea that maybe he's not really the same person. Maybe he's some sort of copy. That's an interesting idea. So they did do it well in this episode, and the whole conflict with Ash Tyler was pretty neat because Tyler also is not exactly himself. He had that split personality thing going on, and so they're kind of similar to each other. Had some bunch of scenes on the bridge, and Tilly is acting all like today's people, like what's up and stuff like that, and she's always cursing and stuff. So Tilly feels like someone from today in the future, and also I wouldn't call it a direct continuity mistake, but I do think that the language changes over time, and so I wouldn't expect the language in the future to be so similar to today. So when Ash Tyler comes to Tilly and they're all like what's up and stuff, it sounds like today. And the same with the coursing. And when they established in the original Star Trek shows that people in the future don't really course, they don't know how to course. And when Kirk was in the past, he didn't know how to do that and he had to improvise. So it's been kind of established that they're not talking that way in the future. And yet in this show, they're kind of talking like today's. And I had a similar problem with the Orville, because the Orville also always throws all kinds of pop culture references from today, and everybody understands it, even aliens. And so it just feels unnatural. It feels illogical, because if this is the far future, then people wouldn't be getting all those references. So anyway, they show us Michael landing on Talos 4, and then we see those blue flowers that we saw in the original episode, The Cage. And I admit it did make me smile. When I saw those blue flowers, I immediately kind of smiled, just like Spock smiled in the original. And then they show us Michael smiling. But my smile kind of faded when she touches that flower without scanning it first. And I know this was done in that original episode as well, when Spock touched those flowers. It's kind of more forgivable when they do silly stuff, but I think a modern show should be more clever than that. And so you land on an alien planet that you know nothing about, and then you touch alien flowers with your fingers. And she did that before, by the way, in that episode when she was in that mycelium dimension. She touches poisonous stuff all the time, and Tilly always sticks her fingers into all kinds of alien stuff. And so I find it kind of annoying. Maybe we can assume, okay, maybe she scanned it when she was in the shuttle, and so that's why she knew it was safe. Fine. I did like the fact that the shuttle told her that the air is fine. Otherwise, I would have poked fun at that as well. Oh, and by the way, right before that, before they landed, the computer was telling her all about the planet. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, if this planet is classified, if no one is allowed to go there, and no one knows about it, then why the hell is the shuttle computer telling Michael all about this planet? So why is this information even on the shuttle? It doesn't really make sense, unless they could have explained it if she has some kind of special clearance. Maybe she stole some computer disk from Section 31 which contains this, then it would be okay, but it had no explanation like that in the episode, so I did find it annoying because this is supposed to be classified, right? No one is supposed to know about it. I remember that episode in which Kirk was given a special file about that planet by an admiral who opened up that file for him, and only then he knew all about that planet. And so why is the shuttle computer giving all this much information to Michael? So that didn't make sense either. And then she touches the blue flowers without any gloves, without scanning it first. And then she meets that woman from the cage, who was done pretty well. Also, she's kind of similar to the original, so I was fine with that. And they even had the scene showing her true form, so it did seem to fit. As for Spock himself, they finally, after the Talosians, I guess, fixed his mind. He starts behaving normally again, and what do I think about him? He still doesn't feel like Spock, so I still have trouble accepting him as the character Spock, but as just a Vulcan character, I don't dislike him. I thought he was kind of cool, he was kind of nice. and the Talosians kind of probe both of their minds, and they show us exactly what happened between them as kids. And the thing that annoyed me the most is that they show Michael running away from her home, which they did mention before, and they show us that she runs into a forest. Vulcan was always said to be a desert planet. It was always shown to be a desert, and in my previous review I said I am willing to accept this by saying that maybe not the entire planet is a desert, maybe some of it is a desert, but it does have areas of vegetation. But then what do they do in this episode? They directly say that the place she ran into was the forest of the Forge. The Forge is the place which was said specifically directly to be the worst desert on Vulcan. That's the biggest desert, that's the hottest place on Vulcan. That was mentioned specifically in Enterprise, in the animated show, and in a whole bunch of different episodes, and of course the expanded universe. And so saying that this forest is in the Forge, that's just an insult, that's a slap to the face of any Trekkies. And I almost feel as if they're doing that deliberately, I feel as if they want to piss us off. So if they simply wouldn't have said that this is the Forge, I would have defended this. I would have said maybe Vulcan is not all a desert, that it has places in which there is vegetation, and yet they do the opposite. They specifically have to mention that this is the Forge. So it feels as if they're deliberately doing that, as if they deliberately don't want us to be able to explain this away, in order to deliberately rewrite it. So Vulcan is no longer a desert, and the Forge is now a forest. So that was the most annoying moment in the whole episode for me. And so they show us that Michael is running into this forest, and then that monster from Attack of the Clones appears and tries to eat her, and that monster also made an appearance in Star Trek 2009, and that happened on the Vulcan moon, even though Vulcan doesn't supposed to have a moon. Maybe it was just a nearby planet, I guess. And now they have that monster here, and it's just there for no reason, just to look cool. It even made the same noises like that monster in Star Wars, the same kind of screeching screams. And then they showed us what happened between Michael and Spock, and they show us that because Michael wanted to protect Spock, that's why she ran away, so that the logic extremists won't kill him, and she didn't want him to follow her, and that's why she insulted him by calling him a half-breed freak, and then he cries, and that's it. So my reaction to this was, "That's all?" Because they were kind of setting something up in the previous episode, that she did something so terrible to him that it's impossible to forgive even decades later, and all she did was call him a few names, and then he cried, and that's it. That's the terrible thing she did, that is so unforgivable. And then they show us how Spock saw the Red Angel, which told him where Michael is, and he said that he mind melded with it, and that he knows that it was a human who was lonely. So I guess that makes it more likely that it turns out to be Michael in the future. Most probably. I hope it's not the case. I hope it's a red herring, because that would be too simplistic. So I hope it will be someone else. And also I think there was a huge missed opportunity with this whole plot, because they directly said that he never saw the Red Angel again until much later, only a few months before the red signals appeared. Only then he saw it again, and I think it's a huge missed opportunity, because there was a dialogue in TNG in which Sarek was talking to Picard about Spock, and he said that Spock always went off to the mountains to some unknown reason. He never told Sarek why, he wouldn't tell him why, and even when he was punished for it, he still kept going to the mountains. And so I think I made a video on that on my other channel, and I showed that clip. And I kind of suggested maybe they would try to tie with that, because that would actually fit if they revealed that Spock kept seeing the Red Angel once in a while. Maybe that's why he was going to the mountains to meet the Red Angel. So that could have been a cool, neat way to tie that bit of dialogue, which remains unknown. We don't know why he was going there. That would have explained that retroactively. So that would be like a good prequel, actually tying loose ends together, explaining things. So this is a missed opportunity, because they didn't do that. They didn't show him going to the mountains to speak to the Red Angel. I guess maybe Vulcans no longer have mountains, because it's all a forest now. And so I was annoyed by this missed opportunity. And he confirms that the Red Angel is indeed from the future and is a human. So maybe it will be a surprise in the end of the season when we finally see who it is. Maybe it will turn out to be Picard from the future. Maybe they will use that to tie to the Picard show somehow. Which I hope they don't do, because I really don't want them to force this show into the continuity. I don't want them to tie it in any way to the Picard show, so I really hope they don't do that. Even though I want to see Picard, I say many times I want to see the Picard show, but I really hope they don't push him into this show. I really hope not. And they did explain why Section 31 wanted to probe the mind of Spock. They said that because they knew he had information from the future, because he mind melded with the Red Angel. So Section 31 wanted that information about the future from his mind. And so at least we have some kind of explanation for that, but it still doesn't explain why Starfleet has that big of a problem with Talos 4, that they would be willing to do the death penalty to anyone who goes there. And it seems as if all of Starfleet is now against the Discovery because it went to that planet, and the Section 31 is chasing the Discovery, and they say that now all of Starfleet will be chasing it. I guess it's a good thing they still have the Spore Drive, because they can use that to avoid all of Starfleet indefinitely. But should they really be using the Spore Drive? Because didn't they establish that it damages the mycelium plane of existence and all of that? So now they're again using the Spore Drive as if nothing happened, as if it's totally safe. So that's a bit fishy, so I guess we still need a proper explanation for why this technology was never used again in the future, because they didn't explain it yet. They planned to use it to get to Talos 4, but then it got sabotaged by that robot lady who got possessed by the probes from the previous episode, and she somehow frames Tyler for doing that, so everybody thinks it's Tyler who did that, and they arrest him, and then we see those red dots in the robot lady's eyes. So that's pretty much it. So the Discovery is now on the run from all of Starfleet. They have the robot lady possessed by the probes from the future sabotaging the ship, and in the promo for the next episode we see that Discovery is going against the headquarters of Section 31, which is ridiculous, and it has a bunch of mines all around it, which have all kinds of razor stuff that they will cut through the ship, and all kinds of special effects like that, and nothing really makes sense. The show is still a mess in my opinion. However, this episode was kind of entertaining, and it did kind of tie some of the stuff together, and so that's why I don't hate this episode. I kind of enjoyed some parts of it, and so overall it wasn't as terrible as usual. I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it. Please like, please subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.